Welcome to the third session of the Architectural Heritage Center's series of panels on design review. My name's Steve Dogger, and I'm the chair of the Programs and Education Review for the AHC. Tonight's session is moving away a little bit from this design review and focusing on what the real goal is from a historic preservation perspective, which is adaptive reuse of existing buildings. And so this is about adaptive reuse methods, means, and missing tools. And it's adaptive reuse is one of the promising paths for housing creation while increasing sustainability and preserving cultural resources. So we have three people on the panel tonight. The first will be a presenter who describes the conclusions of a city consultant study of what kind of things the city might do um, to aid in adaptive reuse, making adaptive reuse more feasible. Uh, and then following that, we'll have two presenters doing case studies. Um, one about existing, well, I guess both about existing buildings, but where adaptive reuse has been used, and they'll give us some examples to talk about the kind of problems that adaptive reuse and successes for adaptive reuse. A little bit about the difference between adaptive reuse for housing as opposed to other uses, and then also in some ways responding to the presentation from the city staff person so that we know how those ideas might actually be beneficial in terms of promoting adaptive reuse, making it more financially feasible, and I guess addressing adaptive reuse to the extent possible in the current market environment that Portland finds itself in, which is not the environment that we found ourselves in 10 years ago. So just understanding one of the city's goals is to get more adaptive reuse happening. What do we need to do now to make that happen? The format's going to be, we'll have the three speakers do all the three presentations, and then that should take about an hour, and then we'll have an hour for question and answer and discussion between the speakers and the audience for the remainder. So our goal is to be done about 8 o'clock. The first speaker will be Hillary Adam. Hillary is a senior planner at the city of Portland, and for the last 2+ years, she's been working in the urban design studio in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability on long-range area plot plans and policies. Previously, she spent about 11 years processing design and historic review cases at the Bureau of Development Services. And for 8 of those years, she was a liaison with the Landmarks Commission. So she's very familiar with design review. And now she's been the lead city staff person on this study that she'll be reporting on. Her education is in architecture from Portland State University and historic preservation from the University of Pennsylvania. And Hillary believes that Portland's best years are ahead of us. Second speaker will be Brad Molson. In 1992, Dr. Molson came to Portland and founded Beam Development. Over the last 34 years, he has played an essential role in developing community-based projects and preserving some of Portland's cherished historical resources. Brad has been a leader in the development and transformation of Portland's Central East Side, where his company has focused on industrial adaptive reuse. He was president of the Central East Side Industrial Council and worked closely with city officials in matters of planning and development to support the health of the Central East Side businesses while integrating residential growth into the surrounding area. Brad approaches development with a deep interest in historic preservation and a focus on community relationships with the goal of building living and working spaces for today and for the future. The third speaker will be Jonah Gamblin. Jonah is an architect and principal of Design Research Office, DRO, based in Portland, with work throughout the Pacific Northwest, California, and Canada. DRO's practice includes affordable and mixed income housing, infill residential, master planning, and adaptive reuse. The firm specializes in projects with complex technical, financial, and urban conditions, where architecture must reconcile competing constraints to create meaningful places for people. Jonah is also a partner in Radiant Blue, a real estate development firm established to embed design thinking within the development process and pursue projects that may not be feasible through conventional development models. So, Hillary, you're up.
Thanks for inviting me to this event. I had a cold last week, and so we're hiking a little front. Yeah, have watery cough drops. Just yeah. Uh, so yeah, my name's Hillary. And it's I work with fear of ending in sustainability. Uh, uh, there, I was tasked to work with Deca Architecture as a consultant. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability is aware of a lot of the concerns that are, milling about in the city right now in terms of like how we revitalize downtown. And it's, two of those topics are that have been floating around of people keep raising are adaptive reuse of office buildings that are more vacant than it used to be, and ground floor activation for storefronts. So we at DECA run two separate studies, and I'm just going to talk about the adaptive reuse one today. Uh, so the purpose of the study was to identify the constraints that make building conversions challenging. I'll talk about these bigger concepts a little bit more depth of the next slide. Uh, we wanted to recognize what Portland has done to date to try to incentivize this kind of work. We wanted to look at what other cities were doing to glean some ideas from them and ultimately to inform future policy work. Um, on that, I would just say that this report isn't yet published, so the recommendations that I'll talk about at the end are just ideas that have come out of JACA, and we haven't thoroughly gone through them to identify which ones we want to promote with or without other bureau partners. It's taking a while to do that, but certain certain projects are dipping into this report and the other report and taking some ideas and potentially moving those forward. So, um, in terms of the scope, we wanted to take a look at the practical and physical considerations. So, like actual buildings, like what are the challenges with the actual buildings, converting them from one use, specifically office use, to other uses. The easiest way to look at that is looking at office to residential, just because residential is a little bit less bespoke than like an institutional use, say. So Jekka looked a little bit more at office to residential, but was generally considering conversion to anything. Uh, we wanted to look at the regulatory considerations, codes, zoning codes, village codes, something like that, and then financial considerations, the local market, and what projects like these could demand and in the city right now to make them feasible. Uh, Looking at peer cities, as I said, we wanted to look at what other cities are doing, to try to get some ideas, and a little bit of a market comparison. I'll talk more about that. We wanted to do just a local audit. Portland has been trying to do things that to incentivize this kind of work. They've been a little bit piecemeal, so we wanted to capture all of those in one place. And looking specifically at uh, Portland's regulatory environment and the financial environment, because it's a little bit different than even just outside of Portland in the city of Oregon. And then we looked at some key studies. Some of you might know that Prosper Portland contracted with Eco Northwest and Gensler to look at adaptive reuse, specifically looking at building typologies to identify which building typologies might be the best fit for an office residential conversion. So we wanted to take a couple of those case studies, take them a little bit further, just with a couple other ideas. And then we also had DECA look at two whole new case studies, looking at an office conversion to residential. I'll talk more about that. And then on the O's, they also did a sort of rudimentary carbon calculation to try to make the case for rehab versus building new. Uh, and that would be profiled Jonah's project, the Cascade Building, just as an example of a conversion that's happening currently, and the Overland Warehouse conversion, which Deca actually converted a three-story quarter building in Old Town into the city their new space. Okay. Um, so specifically about practical and regulatory uh restrictions, things like the floor plate depth and spaces access to light in the air uh helps determine what's the best fit for that obey. The floor plate shape and the structural grid can help identify efficiencies and seismic impacts. Parking is a big consideration, at least for lenders, in terms of turning a building into a residential building. A lot of older buildings don't have parking, some do. Uh, Window size and type, specifically if they're operable. Ceiling heights, for comfortable spaces on the interior. Distort significance. Helps identify projects that might be available for incentives, money, and this part might know what those are. Uh, and neighborhood vitality and community assets, like what's around. Obviously, location, location, location. What can help support building conversion into its best use. And then regulatory, we looked at building code and zoning code requirements. The zoning code actually doesn't have a lot of impediments to conversion. Uh, um, Other cities are expanding their zoning codes to allow residential uses where they previously weren't allowed. So, in terms of our central city, we were way ahead of the game already on that, because you can do residential basically anywhere except for an industrial zone or an open space like car. We looked at Portland site triggers. Our triggers are different than what occur in the rest of the state, because we have generally bigger buildings, so it's more challenging. So to meet those requirements, other things are acoustic saturation, energy codes, mechanical codes, egress. Sometimes a lot of older buildings, especially on the egress, and to would often be required a fire protection. Inclusionary housing is could be a challenge, and then challenging or tracking existing conditions in our existing buildings can in challenge. Well, we heard from our consultant that Portland has a very robust archival system in terms of our prior permits and documents. It's actually still very hard to find the information you need. Sometimes work is done, it's not permitted. And you basically have to establish what the building and what the state of the building is, its purpose to be when you're making changes. So was going to be a challenge, especially if somebody is just in their due diligence period and wants to know what could be remarked at that for a major project. Uh, Financial considerations here. Our biggest, well, two things is the cost of seismic upgrades. If you're converting a building to a higher hazard category, you need to do seismic reinforcements. So that is a big cost. I don't want to put a number on it, but it's pretty significant. Is meeting achievable rents here. Portland does have a housing shortage, but we also have the situation where we have a lot of vacancies right now, and landlords are offering discounted and equal to 3 months rents. And our affordable housing units, the rent for those is approaching market rate rents. So it's pretty tough to demand the high rents that you would be here for currently to make up for the cost of the investment in a conversion. So these are the things that generally impact the little traffic, just cutting a shoe sense of the scale of impact from these things. Historic tax credits could actually be a big one. Any property that's listed at the National Register could be eligible for a 20% tax credit. You do not have a state tax credit. 39 other states do, and 3 more are attempting to make that happen. You do have a special assessment program, tax breeze, but a state tax credit that helps significantly. Um, Permit sheets, SDCs, we have put a pause on the SDCs, at least a temporary pause, or conversions for housing that also require size take upgrades. Uh, we addressed that a little bit in the recommendations. And then the other things, that's definitely not my forte: acquisition costs, conversion costs, and market capitalization rates. Certainly not my forte to eat. Should print and speak this. So these are the peer cities that get looked at. I'm sorry, the path is a little faded. We wanted to look at uh, cities specifically along the West Coast that also have seismic challenges. So we looked at Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. But we also wanted to look at these one city that had a comparable rental market. And so we looked at Minneapolis, and Minneapolis has been doing a lot also in terms of trying to incentivize this kind of work. And we also looked at other cities like New York is getting a lot of press for their conversions. They can demand the high rents and don't have the seismic challenges that we have. So that might be part of the reason why there have a lot of projects. City Council has voiced interest in what Calgary's doing, and Calgary had sort of they had a great program where the federal government injected a lot of money into each of the provinces, and then that money funneled down to the cities. And so Calgary has actually been able to spend a lot of money on a lot of adaptive reuse projects. I think numbers at 21 right now. And I can't remember the number of units, but uh, just a very clear example of government money helping solve this problem. Uh, a lot of the cities that we looked at are doing a lot of things that we have been doing or already did it past, like relaxing zoning regulations where residential can be allowed, or um uh, some cities even that you could do adaptive reuse. And we had a similar state legislative thing that said that, but generally Portland has not had any restrictions against adaptive reuse. So we have like we've looked at a lot of big things. One more I want to mention is Chicago. They also injection of money. They offered grants, but they identified basically a 10 block area where they wanted to convert a lot of office buildings to residential to create a new residential neighborhood, essentially. So it's LaSalle Street, but I think there's a lot of sense in that approach just because we have a downtown office core that doesn't have a lot of residential. So if you introduce, say, a residential building there and it doesn't have any neighbors of a similar use, that could feel a little weird for those tenants. So I love that idea personally. I'd love to take that idea and math that out, but we'll see. So a lot of the ideas are, related to money, low interest loans, bonds, and the say tax credits and incentives. So on the case studies, we had Deca look at two of the cases that Prosper looked at before, the Commonwealth and the Fleischer-Meyer building, and then they looked at the Yaman building and the Power and Lake building. And basically, we had them, okay, what would it look like if you threw all these possible incentives and specifically we wanted them to look at a mixed use model. Uh, so clearly do the 100% conversion, but also look at a 33% conversion because right now our seismic regulations say that you could convert a third of building to a higher hazard use like residential without introducing a seismic requirement. So Monich look at what that looks like, and then they toyed with that and said, okay, what would that also look like if you make that number 50%? So they did that, and you can see, especially with uh non-building uh here, is if you add um the tax abatements and the federal tax credits at a 33%, you could get to that minimum threshold that would make the project feasible. It's still theoretical, uh, but it's an idea. So a lot of these also we toyed with the idea of a Prosper Torquin loan that's a green at the top. Um, their money is not abundance. So we'll see about that. But some of these ideas could be a model for future interventions, if not right now. And this isn't to say that we should be, throwing public money and buildings that aren't seismically upgraded. It just demonstrates that you could make something potentially that could pencil if you're up to the seismic. One more thing about this though is that developers had a tendency to do residential or do commercial, so mixing the uses in a single building, that could be a challenge for some developers. So, as I said, we had them also look at the carbon impacts. They basically, the idea is like, okay, what would the carbon impacts be if you renovated the Power and Light building and the Yon building into residential, leaving the outer skit versus building a brand new building of comparable size and use. And you can see at that top graph that the carbon expenditures for the proposed is the conversion and the baseline is the new building, significantly lower by 2/3 to do the conversion. And the lower graph shows that most of the expenditures for the baseline, the new lake, are spent in structure and exterior walls. And the yellow lines are the interior walls and floors, which is where the expenditure comes from. Conversion. And these are just the graphs for the Yonbo Lake. So these are their recommendations. I'll speed it up, but they had 17 recommendations. One is to continue to improve the process that PPSD has now, the single point of contact, but also making it more robust so that somebody could potentially ask more questions about financial incentives, or how to quickly look at their permanent hurts, amending design review regulations and historic review of regulations for projects that are going through the tax credit process. That's also being discussed in the design review report that I think you've had some education about recently. It was just released a couple weeks ago. It's on BPS's website. Another recommendation there. Um, Trying frontage improvement relief for conversions just to see if that makes a significant dent in PBOT's budget to the block room, eliminating SDCs for conversion projects. Right now, it's limited to housing and it will like spiker. But what if you expand and add to all conversion projects? Other things, establishing a state grant program, advocating for state historic tax credit program, which I think many of us have been doing for years now. Got to keep at that. And seeding that we're evolving is known for conversion. And then understanding that conversion impacts on property values just to measure if it makes sense for the city to continue to invest in this kind of work based on how much we're paying tax and taxes. So, other things, eliminating inclusionary housing requirements. This one's interesting just because if you meet the threshold to do inclusionary housing units, then you get an automatic 3 to 1 additional floor area ratio. Um, so, uh, which means you can build a bigger building. That doesn't really make sense for like already exists. So, existing like conversions are getting that benefit. So maybe eliminate the cap requirements, permanently adopting housing regulatory relief provisions for conversions. There are some things that were recently adopted by city council to try to make it easier for housing, including allowing a residential on the ground floor, which Joga has taken advantage of. Uh, Adopt an FAR transfer tool for conversions. We currently have that for historic resources, but if a building is being converted and it's potentially going to stay in that in use, maybe transfer off any use FAR. Uh, Easing the city seismic code. I know that folks at PPD are continuing to have these conversations just to try to look at where they can be a little bit more flexible. Implementing a historic building code. Los Angeles has this. They've had it for a long time. It took a lot of work to build that program, but it does help historic buildings move through the process faster, spend a lot less money on changes that our Eddie News building would have to make, and it preserves historic character. So that's one option, but it would be a heavy lift. And then a couple other things supporting a housing pilot project conversion, like have guest city funded projects. And then this perception of relief is basically just saying whatever we choose to do in terms of it's like make big splash out of it so that people know that these multiple tools or whatever we decide are here to help make these projects happen. So that's mostly it. This is a list. I don't know if this PowerPoint's gonna keep share it out, but this is kind of a cheat sheet for all of the recommendations with pros and cons. And tons of tweets.
Thank you for inviting me. Name is Brad Nelson. I'm the founder of Beam Development. Moved from New York about 35 years ago. and I'm a recovering eye doctor, and work from a okay.
Sorry, it's just me.
Um, Came out for a research study at the Case Institute, and eventually lost funding, and I decided to go into real estate. So I'm not nearly as knowledgeable as a lot of other people, but for years I've figured out how to make things happen. The one thing other I'm not going to compete with the technical aspects of this, and I've certainly talked to some of it. I'm going to talk about the passion for historic preservation, and I'm going to talk about the passion that I noticed coming from New York and born in Brooklyn, and having seen so much of the historic inventory of buildings and homes lost because nobody paid attention and didn't value the character and the history of the city. And I admire Portland. A lot of people have a lot of feelings about Portland, and what's good and bad, but Portland has a culture to it, and I think that culture is still alive. I think that the spirit of Portland is still here. I mean, I think it's been a little tarnished. I think it's been stopped on, but and when I came here, I sold my practice. I had a building in New York, a little building, and I invested it and decided to try to dig in because I have love for old buildings, not exclusively, but a lot of to me, it tells a story, and I'm all that a story. And as a developer, I don't think you're a good developer unless you help to tell a story. And I think stories inspire people. And I think a lot of people who've come to Portland and who've stayed Portland are here because of the story. And that story has changed. That story still has challenges, but that story is still here. So, and I'm happy to um, take you through a list. And along the way of all these years of developing and learning, because I'm trained as a doctor, I'm not trained as a an architect, or I'm not trained as a engineer or contractor. But it's I've learned a lot, mainly by making mistakes. But I'm very proud of a lot of the things that we've been able to do. So I'm gonna take quickly, and feel free to stop me and ask me any questions. I picked um, about a dozen of the projects that I've done over the years, and there's some new projects. I also dabbled in engineered cross laminated timber buildings, which is another one of the things that are kind of interested in me. But most of the buildings, probably the vast majority of them, are on the historic register. I use historic tax credits. I use special assessment. I use whatever I could to try to leverage funds to build this. And at the same time, again, my personal belief that a lot of the historic buildings offer value that new buildings don't. And I that from a cost standpoint, from a flexibility standpoint, and we have my company has really catered to smaller business. We're not we're not building on corporate campuses. We're not building huge floor plate buildings. We do have some pretty big buildings, but um, most of them are designed with the idea of being easily demised, and be able to accommodate small businesses. And because let's be honest, we've had, I mean, over the years, we've had hundreds of small businesses that come in and say, 1, 2, 3, 4 person firms that are starting, and they say, we don't know how much lease should we sign? How long should we sign it? Banks want you to have longer leases because that's, financeable. But, tenants that are early stage businesses fearful of that. So our model has been one that, as much as we can, is the kind of custom design leases and flexibility in leasing. And because we have a lot of square footage and a lot of buildings that are full of a lot of different sizes. We put into our leases, we put in, we'll give you 500 square feet if you need it, or 250, or whatever the number is. And if in a year you need more or you need less, we'll work with you to adjust the square footage. So they're kind of high. Truth be told, and I don't think we talk enough about this, and I know most of this is about store preservation. It's not about leasing. It's not about accommodating business. It's about, it's about preserving buildings. But in that same context of talking about preserving buildings, having smaller spaces and having more flexible leasing protocols allows the building to morph, because we at this point, especially today, we have no idea what the future's going to be. Is it going to be smaller, larger, medium? But we know we need flexibility, and we know we need creativity, and we know we need people who own buildings to say, "I'm here to your benefit is my benefit." There's no benefit if you don't understand that everybody's got to win, everybody's got to survive. So okay, um, uh, one of our leaders talk about, uh, I think this is a little bit of a cathartic exercise here, because this is the Grand Stark Hotel that the day that this hotel opened was the day of COVID lockdowns. $25 million project. About $5 million of historic tax credit was on the register. We poured on, I saw this building while it was still the Schleifer Furniture Building. And we ended up buying it and renovating. What a challenge. And I'm happy to get into any of the details about it, because it's quite an interesting structure to it. But it's designed to be smaller rooms, very efficient, and very flexible. We're working on a third restaurant to come in. Needless to say, that restaurants that suffered the issues of our current times. And luckily, in all of our buildings, most of the restaurants have survived. We've had to work with them, we've had to nurture them, but we have both benefited from support of each other. So I'm happy to go through this at the same time that we bought the Schleifer Furniture building. They had a warehouse on Second Avenue, and of course, knowing me, sucker for older buildings, I couldn't pass it up. And it was a great building. It ended up eventually became Rouvant Office. Interesting, because I'm an eye doctor, that it had turned out to be optically related, but a wonderful building. I put this building is great, and if any of you at one time would like to tour it, it is an incredible build. This is a new building that building. This was built in the spirit. One of my main interests in development is the idea of live workspaces. I am a believer in live work, because it does create. I mean, look what's happened. This is going back many years, but look what's happened. That the traditional office has changed. The use of traditional office, the desire, and I think some of that is related to this. So this building, 10 stories, is 5 stories of residential and 5 stories of office. The idea was, okay, great. You'll have the top floors of residential, the bottom floors office, and you can your commute is an elevator down to 2 floors, and it really leased up pretty quickly. I actually lived in this building for a while. My last child left me, wished to left permanently. Well, there's your a great building, great views. It's at the Birdside Bridgehead. We did a number of buildings at the Bridgehead. This is it. Well, one of the problems with being me is that you take a look at a building, regardless of what the numbers look like. You say, "I got to sleep this building," whether whether I look at all the numbers and I figure out all the costs, which is not traditionally my strong point. This was a building that spoke to, and it has great bones, great timbers, great history, and is uh, my office was in this building for a number of years, and cargo. I don't know if you know who guys. Cargo is the major tenant in here, and what a great group of people. What if any of you know Bridget? Uh, she is a real benefactor to the community. Goes out, does Haywood. This is Eastside Exchange. This is the other building that's right across from the at the Bridgehead and from the Slate. And this was this building on the National Historic Register was originally a I think it was built for is a housing for uh, workers who built ships and built munitions and all kinds of stuff. And Great Bones would put one of the we used a lot of cross laminated timber to build building infrastructure. We also put all new windows in, and we put a roof deck. And it unfortunately to most forests, especially according to COVID, it was well occupied and well respected, and it's got great spaces. It's got great amenities. Um, um, one of my bigger challenges, and that I steered away to mocap, is we bought the Globe Hotel building, which turned out to be the home for the Oregon College we're into this. I was on the board is a of the school for a long time, and they wanted to move, and they wanted something that represented the ethos of the school and the history, and we were able to kind of mesh those together and preserve the building and take advantage of again historic architecture design and the special assessment. Wonderful building. Unfortunately, OCOM left, and so we're right now. It's trying to find a new housing player. Um, this is a kind of a little bit of an aberration, but this was the old, as far as I've been told. So, it's one of the oldest nursing homes department, and we was uh, full and on hard times, and had an incredible array of buildings. One newer, but most of them historically all were put on the register. We built a new building or converted the new building into more modern space and the older building into units. So this is an example of adaptive reuse to live workspaces. So in these buildings, especially the brick buildings, um, the older brick buildings, there are spaces that are from 200 square feet up to about 500 square feet. So 200 square foot, and in the building, because it was designed as a nursing home, there was a lot of common areas. That there was a restaurant, there were shops, there were all kinds of interesting little spaces. So we turned those into common area space. We had a wood shop, we had a ceramic shop, we had a photo shop, we had art studios, and we had um, studios for the artists. So we couldn't say out that artists had to submit their work to a board, and the board decided they talked about not only their qualifications as an artist, but their little dedication to the community, to preserve the community. It had a really interesting board. We actually put on shows of plays. It's beautiful courtyard here. We had theater group in there, painting. Well, this is a great example of kind of creative thinking. And you know, If pencil didn't, I'll tell you, it certainly didn't create the kind of financial reward that you'd hope for, but it's still in operation. It has 175 units, I think, in last count, and a lot of people who probably would have left Portland have stayed and pursued their career as artists. East End Commerce Center, which was one of my first building in the Central East Side. Um, uh, Probably one of my favorite buildings. And this building, I bought this building and the building across the street, Ocean and Water Avenue. And I love the light, I love the windows, I love the light. I mean, I will tell you that when I bought the building, it was mostly empty. It was storage. There was a wire company that had probably 3/4 of the building, steel wire. Anyway, emptied it. I would say 90% of the windows were broken, were missing. So it literally was 6 months of repairing these are Chicago steel windows that are suffered the length of time. We would repair or replace every broken window and every frame that went through. We have a lot of different businesses. Probably lost count. We're probably 60 or 70 businesses in this building. We also have a restaurant that's been there for 25 years. We work very closely with Clark Lewis, and it's been a real pub of activity. We have some shared spaces in the building where people network. A lot of the other thing that we try to pride ourselves is network connected towns, because some of them they collaborate, they create opportunities for each other, and it really can make a difference. And then these are some of the really smaller projects, but they're meeting housing. That We're on the west side. The Fairmont Hotel with Lizzie. There's a model out in the hallway up next studio. That it was the last remaining buildings from the Lewis and Clark exposition, slated for development for demolition. And I stepped stupid, put my hand up and said, you know what? I can't. That can't happen. So, dug in that the building had been jacked up. There was no permanent foundation. A poor foundation. Rock it down, reframe the undercarriage, and rebuilt every studio. I think it's probably close to 100 units. Also, very affordable. The Milepost 5 project, the average rent from a studio, was few one bedroom. Also, in studios was under $250 a month, including utility. Still to this day, it's under $300. So it creates a certain level of opportunity, and it was a commitment on our part to try to provide our notion of affordable housing. Westfall, similar story. Harrison Court, this is one of my favorite buildings in the PSU area. Had the clawfoot tubs in the kitchen, and actually they washed the dishes in the clawfoot tub. And I mean, when we bought the building and renovated, we left the clawfoot tubs in the kitchen. It was like one of the selling points. Figuring out, boy, would you like an apartment with a clawfoot tub in there, and we could bathe with the dishes, instead of visitor. Anyway, I think a couple things that I think are really important. And well, I can try to discuss it with you as much as I can, the financial considerations with the tax credits and all that, and how that works. Of course, so many things have changed, but I think if we as a city decide that preservation is an important part of our story, and that we don't lose that connection to our history. We have a credible history. And Portland and Oregon was here well before San Francisco and well before Seattle. And, we we have a real history, and we have a real, I believe, a place to admire about how what we've done right, ha- also what we've done wrong. And I think if we could deal with that in honesty, and we can deal with that, we've made mistakes, and God knows, I think that we're recoverable. I think that we still stand a chance that we will, but the who Portland is and what Portland is still here. It hasn't gone. Question was, what are the seismic challenges to doing building like East Bank Commerce Center? East Bank Commerce Center is a pretty stout building. I mean, so most seismic issues relate to the vertical loads and the lateral rigidity and flexibility of buildings. These buildings are all the East Bank Commerce Center is all reinforced concrete. Would it crumble? Absolutely. Would it still stand? At least the experts and who advise us, it would still stand. So there are, and as opposed to a brick building, which can collapse totally. So yeah, I think and again, I'm not the engineer to really give you full comments, but the East Bank Commerce Center is probably one of the most sturdy buildings, and East Bank Commerce Center dates back to when the river came into the courtyard. And so and if you're ever interested, come to my office in there. We have pictures of the boats in the courtyard, waiting for the unload stuff or pick up stuff or whatever it is. So yeah, seismic is a big challenge, and at some point, I think with careful building and not keeping the occupancy at a certain load, and be careful, and you'll see, like Clark Lewis, we reinforce a lot of pillars. I mean, we've taken caution that we didn't have to take. So we do take into consideration, and I'm in the building too. So I will tell you, we try to take as much reasonable caution, but you can't. It's impossible to, you know, deal with every issue that potentially comes. But we're and this is a great conversation to have, which buildings and how much seismic upgrades are necessary. So thank you.
In order to record the questions, we're going to do it's easier to do the best after the presentations, because then Patrick could come around to give you a mic. So next, let's have Jonah talk, and you will talk a little bit about the seismic issue and talk about it in terms of the casket build. Great.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to follow these two presentations because I totally agreed with everything that Hillary said, and it's great to see these projects can actually happen. So this is I'm going to show you sort of an in-depth kind of a little bit under the hood of a project, an office of residential conversion that's actually in progress. We are, cross your fingers, a couple months away from starting construction, and I think what's interesting, or what hopefully I can kind of communicate to you, is that it's, as a project type, there's again a lot of wonderful things to be found with these sorts of buildings. A lot of advantages we found for keeping them in the community and giving them new life. And there's also a lot of challenges that are kind of unique to the kind of time that we're in right now in terms of the local market, in terms of seismic issues. And so they also become extremely challenging projects as well. And so what I'll try and do is maybe fold in some of the experience that we've had on this one and try and then extrapolate how that could potentially help these projects become more feasible in the future, because they're wonderful, I think, ones to do. And I really appreciated the kind of joy aspect of it. There is a lot of wonderful things to be found in these buildings. So this is the project that we're in the process of converting. It's called the Oregon Casket Building because there was something called the Oregon Casket Company that built this building in 1893 and operated a business manufacturing caskets inside of it. It's interesting. Casket manufacturing was actually kind of advanced manufacturing in the late 19th century because of just some of the skilled carpentry that went into it, and they were obviously located here because of the natural resources. It's in Old Town. It's a 5-story building, 25,000 square feet. Basically has not been touched. I had some friends that were in here in the 90s, and since then it's basically been vacant. This is the project site. So it's basically just on 5th and Flanders, right on the corner. The Chinese garden is there on the right. TriMet is kind of on the top part of the page. It's on light rail. We first saw this building in 2022. Basically, as you're probably aware, the city of Portland passed a couple of ordinances that were to facilitate office and residential conversion. One of them was relaxing seismic design parameters, and the other one was waiving SDCs. It was kind of the first time in which those were done. We were actually looking for another client for a kind of a cultural arts center type project, but saw this one, met the owners, realized it kind of fit the bill for a potential renovation really, really well, and so thought, maybe. 3 years later, it's almost maybe, very, very close. But basically, what's proposed is 34 units. The upper 4 floors will be divided up into 8 studios, really kind of typical, not typical, but kind of your classic loft style studio. There's 2 live workspaces at the ground floor, and then a commercial space, retail on the corner. Again, pretty modest in size, not a huge building, but again, with all the sorts of competing issues at play at the moment, been relatively challenging to put this together. I want to just give you a sense. I know that Brad talked a little bit about how these projects come together, but in many ways the kind of organization and the ownership and the financial structure is kind of as much, at least for us, this has been as much of like the design issue as anything having to do with the building itself. So at the heart of it, there's a company. It's called Oregon Casket Redevelopment LLC. Brilliant name. But it's basically a partnership between us as architects, a general contractor. We are both bringing equity to the project. So we have our own money in this, and we also have a third equity partner. So it's basically bringing together, and this was kind of intentional when we first saw it because of a lot of the risk in these projects comes through cost management, and having contracting as part of the project was the way to mitigate that. We also have as a partner the owners of the existing building. They are going to actually be coming into that partnership partially. We have tax credits, so we're taking advantage, as Brad mentioned, as basically the federal historic tax credits. You get 20% of the value of the renovation as tax credits, and large institutional investors have uses for those. So we have a large institutional investor that is coming into this project buying the credits, also as a partner. And then the 2 other ones that really, frankly, moved the needle and made this feasible. One is Prosper Portland, who's providing very favorable financing for the project, and the other one is Portland Clean Energy Fund, who's providing a forgivable loan that's kind of on the basis of some of the carbon benefits coming from adaptive reuse. This is sort of a pilot program for them that they're doing in with one other project. So that's kind of how the project is organized. Just to give you a little bit more, what we're doing. Again, this is the building itself, 5 stories. It's got the right depth to width. I mean, you look at a lot of different buildings to convert to residential. This one is narrow, right? You don't need a lot of depth. Residential units, 35 to 40 feet. Much more than that, you can't really do anything with it. Daylight gets too far back. So this one is 50 feet in one direction in the short end, 100 feet in the other direction. Got windows on 2 sides, no windows on the other 2 sides. It couldn't be any easier to convert, basically, from a building planning point of view. This is the typical interior of the building. This is actually the 2nd floor. That's why it's nicer that they have their casket showroom, I guess, on this floor. So they've veneered the wood. It's beautiful. It's post and beam. We're And then masonry. This one has plaster. Some of the other floors, the brick is actually exposed. All of that is remaining as part of the project. We are preserving all of the existing structure that will be exposed. Their members are large enough that they're able to kind of resist char. So from the fire protection, they don't need fire protection directly. All the existing decking, which you can see up there, that will be preserved inside the units as the ceiling finish, but they will have a new topping on top of them for acoustics and fire separation, partially. And then the windows will be replaced, but kind of in a historic kind of character. To give you a sense just of how the planning grid works out, again, I said it, I mentioned it's 50 by 100 feet. There's a 14-foot structural bay, which lines up very nicely for residential units. So you basically, each apartment gets a window. It's kind of a pod of kitchens and bathrooms at the back that nest within each other. I'll show you why we did that in a moment. And then on that back side, you can see there's windows on two sides, and then no windows on two sides, and the stairs, which we're doing what are called interlocking or scissor stairs, which is a challenge in and of itself, and an elevator gets put into the back of the building. So again, you kind of take advantage of the parts of the building without new windows. This is the plan, which is pretty similar. So this is one of these typical middle units. These are around 450 to 500 square feet. It's a market rate project. So we've looked at versions of these that use affordable housing subsidies, so low-income housing tax credits. This is purely market rate. I mean, market rate in Old Town these days is the retail is going to be free. That's actually exactly. This is one casket per person. The project is, again, it is a market rate project. One real interest that I know Prosper Portland has had in having development in this neighborhood is having market rate. There's a lot of affordable housing in Old Town. But at the same time, the project is essentially underwritten to things that are barely above affordable rents. And hopefully that helps it fill up and stay full. But these are, something like this is, I don't know, maybe $1,150, $1,200 a month, which for, hopefully people would like that. I mean, it should be nice. So this is one of the typical middle ones. As I mentioned, we have these little bump outs for the kitchens and bathrooms, basically to keep the volume of the space. I mean, one thing that you walk through this building and it's just beautiful now, and the idea that you kind of carve it up into these little apartments. There's a part of me that's so this is our kind of a way to give a little bit of amenity storage space at an upper level, and also keep at least some of the volume of the existing structure there. This is one of the corner units. Corner units have some fantastic, there's actually a really beautiful view down to the south. You can see basically to Burnside and Big Pink. There's not much in the way. And then the ground floor, as I mentioned, one of the things that we've benefited from are some kind of adjustments to the zoning code to allow ground floor residential use in the central city, which I think for us, given the challenges of retail in this neighborhood right now, I think helped get some comfort for how we were going to activate that ground floor. So there are two kind of genuine live-work units. I say genuine in the sense that they have kind of independent entrances, and you could operate a business out of them and also have a living space because they have a mezzanine in them. And then, as I mentioned, a retail space, but this one is basically, we've underwritten virtually no rent, with the idea being that getting at least someone to be in this space and to keep it active would be effectively an amenity for the building. And just to give a kind of a view, this is that optimistically that retail space with the cool coffee shop down to the main entry, and then one of the live work spaces, which have enough height at the ground floor that you can get a kind of a sleeping mezzanine kitchen down below, and then still kind of a dedicated workspace out in front. And then we are, as I mentioned, participating in the National Park Service historic kind of the tax credit program. So there was a whole nother layer of review to this project in terms of kind of restoring, in particular, the storefronts, the ground floor, to historic character to them. So there was these aluminum storefronts put in the 1960s. That's coming out, and there's a kind of a storefront reconstruction as part of the project. So that's kind of at a high level, and I thought maybe it would be helpful, maybe as also a way to frame kind of a conversation and echo some of the things that were said earlier, just to kind of talk about some of what the challenges and opportunities we've had on this project. I think one of the main ones for challenges is there's so much kind of layers of regulatory compliance that you need to go get. You're in the middle of, and it's very hard with adaptive reuse to find relief valves, because the building is there, the shell is there. You're not making it bigger, you're not making it smaller. It's like you're really working within a box. So yeah, we have the funding sources locally come with a whole set of requirements. We have the city, in particular, the seismic, the Title 24. We have state prevailing wage, because we're getting basically public funding. There's federal review through the National Park Service. We have other compliance with the IRS from the tax code. So again, all of these just compliance with. These are kind of rules you have to comply with to do the project. And compliance takes up so much energy that there's very little left to reduce costs effectively. So just cost control has been a main one. As I think we've all been aware of the broader softness in the Portland residential market, vacancy, limited rent growth. So from an economic point of view, that's challenging. And operational costs, we've seen on some other projects, operational costs getting up to 30 to 40% of NOI, and that's in a neighborhood like Old Town, that's sadly vandalism. It's higher insurance rates, and higher property maintenance rates. So those are all create a set of challenges about how you make one of these financially feasible. So what are some means we've taken to try and mitigate those challenges? Well, one is this, as I mentioned, this kind of integrated design team. So you bring all the different pieces together and have people work collectively with shared incentives. Has been a main one. Favorable financing, I think, as mentioned previously, debt that has a bit higher loan to value ratio is important, and we're getting lower interest rates. So there's basically a lot that can happen that's still debt that's being paid back, but at the same time the terms are a little bit more forgivable than you'd find in conventional markets right now. Partnership with the building owner has been extremely key. I think that's something that comes up in a lot of office rental conversions. Finding an owner who has belief in the project, is willing to potentially participate within the project, or at least be patient for you to put the deal together, is really critical, because at least we weren't in the position to just go out and buy it. And then, as I mentioned, some of the better housing by design, kind of adjustments to the zoning code, in particular the ground floor residential. There's been some reduction in requirements for bicycle parking. Frankly, the large bicycle thing was always a killer. And those in particular have made a big difference. And so, we are looking at a few other of these once this kind of gets going, and I sort of found myself asking the question, well, this has not been super easy. What would it take to do it again? And maybe this gets to some of the recommendations. And this, I think, echoes a lot of stuff that was said earlier. But very big one is a bit more of a pragmatic approach to life safety from the city of Portland. There's building code is actually strangely subjective in many ways. Zoning code, I think, is actually pretty concrete and specific. Building code there's a lot of gray area and it's a lot of open to interpretation. And we've been actually pretty surprised at how conservative the interpretations are through the city of Portland recently. I think a revolving loan fund is a fantastic idea. I think, we're getting a lot of public financing for this project, and I would love to be in a position to return that and let other projects utilize that. I think that's a great one. Obviously the stronger demand, and then some of the existing incentives really make a huge difference. The SDC waivers are gigantic. The ground floor residential, and as I said, the bike parking. So that's kind of. Oh, and the other one I would say, and I think this was mentioned earlier as well, but the limitation on the public works frontage improvements, that is really huge as well. So that's where we're at. Yeah. We do not have parking. Yeah, there's a parking lot next door. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So, Hillary, you showed a chart, and I couldn't really read most of it, but it was a bunch of different hypothetical projects and a minimum, pencil outline, and some of them rose above it, some rose below it. Remember that chart? And I assume that chart included the cost of acquisition for each project. It has to be in there to know if it's going to pencil out, right? And so my question is, because we see the cost of acquisition going down, as far as I know, these office buildings aren't getting more expensive as they sit vacant. Is there, as a general matter, can you say that on average, if the vacant sort of pre-war office buildings in downtown Portland, if their market value declined by X percent, then that would make a lot more of them pencil out? Or is the acquisition cost already kind of a small part of it, so it doesn't really help if they get a lot cheaper?
In that chart, the cost of acquisition was kind of built into what they labeled a baseline. So, it's the cost of the building. And I would imagine as more buildings are sold for less than their prior value, it could be more feasible for them to be converted, just because the starting point would be lower already.
That means, have you quantified that?
No, no.
You can say, on average, long vacant office buildings in Portland went down by another 50%, all of a sudden a lot more of them pencil up. We don't know that number.
No, we haven't taken on a project like that to look at the math. We do have economic planners in-house, but they haven't been tasked with that kind of analysis. It would be interesting to look at, sure, but we haven't done that math.
I guess it is a little bit interesting that most of the buildings that we see, the prices are relatively recent buildings, right? Yeah, the bank tower.
Bring this to you guys, if you want to sit with them.
I don't know what's happening with them. Because I think a lot of the older buildings are they're in very, very long hands, and their cost basis for those owners is low.
Let me
Yeah. So I said here, it's going to be a lot lower.
Okay, John, maybe you could repeat that for a second.
I'm sorry. I was just saying that a lot of the older buildings downtown, they've been owned by people who've owned them for a very long time. Their cost basis is very, very low. They often don't have debt, and so they haven't been forced to sell. And so to some degree, we don't yet know that much about what the clearing price for those buildings really is. And in case it you know, it could be 30% of what we think today.
Hi, I'm just curious. Up there, do it again. Would you do it again? I guess I'm trying to say is when you take on one of these buildings, is the process of getting it ready to go like worse than you thought it would be, or you've done it a lot, so I imagine you've got a good handle. Yeah, good handle on that.
Well, it's an interesting time, and I think one of the most important factors is the condition of the building and the structural element of the building, because a lot of it is going to be potentially seismic and the windows, and I mean, I think that if we can approach this from a cost standpoint from the beginning, so if you like building, I mean, I think that this casket building was a passion project, obviously, and I think that hats off to you for taking it on, because it's I think it will turn out to be a wonderful project. But does it make sense right now? Hard to say. And I think development right now is like going to a casino and putting up your chips and saying, I like my odds, but the days of being able to buy a building, renovate it, and flip it are not here.
Gone by now. The other curious thing was all of the different, things that you have to do. And so do you guys have like a large staff where somebody writes your grants and somebody else does this, that, all of those compliance things? They just seem overwhelming.
I think we hire consultants
Okay.
who give us, tax consultants, we engineers, contractors. I mean, so we try to get a good grasp of what we're looking at, but the market, it's an odd market, especially in areas like Old Town. So it's a little bit flying by the seat of your pants.
Seems daunting. My sister and I have been restoring our old family heritage like farmhouse in South Carolina, and it's just been one Murphy's Law after another. It's just, if it can go wrong, it will. And it always takes longer and costs more. And so I'm very impressed with what you've accomplished.
One thing maybe to the point of acquisition costs and the kind of broader economics. I mean, like this project just in particular. I mean, I think all of these things are challenges, but long process, a lot of risk, right? Very expensive. You have to guarantee things. There's a lot of risk. The building probably will be worth, I would say, somewhere between 20 and 30% less than it costs to do the project. So do all that stuff and you're actually in the hole. The only reason why it does make sense is because there's, number one, a very long-term forgivable financing that's in there that you can count on. And two is we have a forgivable loan. So another chunk of it. So yeah, over 5 to 10 years, then you kind of you're out of that hole. But without that, I mean, nobody would do that because it's a lot of effort and a lot of risk to lose a lot of money. And that's even with an extremely low acquisition price. So it's yeah.
So truly, these are long-term investments. If you're again looking for a short-term investment that's going to make sense, you don't do this. So I think what you're seeing right now is people who are passionate about Portland and have a connection and are willing to forge that risk about what it's going to be. And it could be 5 years, it could be 10 years. I mean, this is the way it is.
This question's for Jonah. For the casket building, you mentioned that you guys used an interlocking or scissor staircase. Could you describe what that is?
So it's, well, it gets a little technical, but I mean, essentially for buildings of this size, basically once you get more than 4 apartments per floor or units, you need to have 2 means of egress. Typically those means of egress are in enclosures that are rated for fire, and that fire rating goes basically from the roof all the way to the ground where you get out of the building. One way you sometimes see in other places, not in Portland, of doing that in a way that saves space is if the 2 stairs basically kind of interlock, you think of it almost more like a spiral rather than as 2 basically columns. So one stair goes down and the other one's kind of going up next to it. There's ambiguity in City of Portland building code and interpretation of the building code in Portland about when and how you can use stairs like this. So we went through an appeal process that demonstrated that there was they were separated by a 2-hour rating, but that the stairs themselves were independent. So it allowed us to do 2 things: one, save space, but also then limit the openings in the diaphragm. So basically, when you do part of the seismic strategy is you need to do basically a strong horizontal thing at every floor, and the holes in that strong horizontal thing make it weaker. So limiting the extent of that was important.
And were you still able to get the required exit separation distance with that?
Yes. So because of the floor-to-floor height of the building, it's a good question. Yes, if you have the 2 exits need to be separated by a third of the diagonal, but because of the high floor-to-floor height, we were having straight run stairs rather than if you get basically a lower floor-to-floor height. These are about 14.5 feet. So they were straight runs, which meant that the doors, and it also wrapped around the elevator to get to that. But yes, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I walk a lot on the PSU campus, and there's a lot of the last historic buildings seem to have signs in front of them to tear them down and build. There's one 5-story apartments, dorm, wasn't built as apartments. I think it was pre-dorms. And they want to tear it down to build a 5-story apartment building for the students. I'm sure there are good arguments about, air conditioning and other modern things, but it's very disturbing. There's at least 3 buildings, I think, that they want to tear down that are beautiful old buildings. And I know the financing is a different order altogether when it's a university, but I don't know what is to be done.
I can try to take that question. I think there are 2 buildings that PSU is proposing to demolish to build a bigger single building with more units. Neither of those buildings were designated historic, and so the protections for them were very limited. Although I know that a couple organizations tried to encourage them to rethink their proposal. I do believe that they're moving forward with the project to demolish, but it's my understanding that they are intending to pursue a deconstruction. I hope I'm not mistaken about that, but one of my colleagues at BPS is piloting commercial deconstruction because we do have the residential deconstruction program, and I believe she's working with PSU at least to try to salvage some materials from those buildings. Other than the property owner designating them, there is kind of little that you
Yeah,
can do.
yeah. The property owner is them.
I think she's next, and then we'll go.
Hi, thank you all. I'm going to kind of bounce off. So I have a question for Jonah, actually two. One, if you would like to meet with me so I can talk about the single staircase policy, because that's actually something we're trying to get passed at council. So I would like to get more technical details because I've been working with the fire department on that. The second thing is actually more of a question. What percentage of your total project cost was actually from public funding in order to make this work?
So, I mean, you mean in terms of the overall the sources for this project? How much was public? It's a good question. The full budget, let's see if I can do this in my head, is about $11.5 million for the project. Of that 11.5, about 8.5 is a combination of Prosper and PSF, and then 2 million is from the historic tax credits the project's generating. So, if you add those two together, it's what, 85%? It's a lot. Yeah.
Okay. And so I guess at this point when the city's when we're looking at reuse of buildings, just from a standpoint, because we have the SDC waivers and different programs, I know that the city probably can't always sustain forever in that way, but it'd be interesting to see what other ways we can just make things more affordable. Maybe if it's timing, you mentioned something about limitations on public works. If there's other things, because I think this is for a small building too, and I know a lot of the buildings downtown that they're vacant are the larger floor plate, and that's its whole other kind of problem. So I'd be interested to see how we can figure that out to work with the private market in doing this, if that's even feasible to for a long term.
Yeah, I think it's been nice to have the benefit of public financing to be able to do a project at a time where it's difficult. And at the same time, you don't want 2 or 3 projects to get all the resources and then, nothing else happen. So that's why, I think something like a revolving loan fund would be, that has, that gets you through construction, that gets you through stabilization, and then allows you to refinance at a time, maybe with some, would probably be I don't want to say better use, but something that could facilitate more projects, for sure.
Yeah. And I think we did just kind of started a revolving loan fund, so we're getting there.
Yeah.
Last quick question, we don't have to go into detail, but do you happen to have, Brad, any kind of, I guess, more technical things about the seismic requirements as far as because you have a lot of unreinforced masonry buildings that you've gone through, and as far as what was actually required, because when we're talking about changing seismic, we're looking at different variations of what we can do, and kind of what the actual cost is to building owners, because I know that Los Angeles kind of did a 50% pass through to tenants, and so to see if there's a path forward on that. Do you think that's feasible, or?
I think you have to take it on a building by building basis and really look at the amount of rebar and the quality of the cement or whatever it happens to be, and then kind of make your assessment based upon that. And the design of the building is a huge one. The East Bank Commerce Center over here was a challenge because it has those big windows. So, but it was also, they put enough rebar in the columns and in the ceiling to kind of give it a little added strength. So we were able to access that benefit into the design. But it's on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, guys.
You showed a retail space in the ground floor of the casket company. Was that the minimum that the city would allow you to go to?
I don't want to misspeak here, but I believe we had no ground floor retail requirement. There was a requirement for transit, it's the transit Main Street entrance. On transit, there needs to be an orientation of a primary building entrance off the transit mall. But I don't think that we had a requirement for retail space in the project.
It raised a question in my mind when we see lots of relatively new buildings, not repurposed old buildings, but new buildings with nothing in the ground floor retail that had to be installed in the building. I was wondering if the city is, this is maybe directed at Hillary, if the city is reviewing, considering the fact that retail is changing dramatically all over the country.
Yeah, there originally, the Central City Plan District would have required ground floor active use requirements on the ground floor of this building. I believe the line was on the street. But because of housing regulatory relief that waived those requirements for a certain period of time, which also allowed residential on the ground floor, they didn't have to meet that. So no retail requirement, but it's usually a ground floor active use, which could be office or some other active use, and in some cases residential. But residential is also prohibited on a lot of streets. The current Central City Code amendments project that was just at Planning Commission last week, they're proposing to amend that map to reduce the number of streets that prohibit residential on the ground floor. So yeah, like, we recognize that we have very small blocks. We have a lot of streets. We have more street than a lot of cities, which means a lot of building frontage and a lot of active use requirements. So we recognize that there's not a lot of active use going on right now, certainly not as much as before. And so that is something that we're considering with our current code amendments.
So I have a question. When you were talking before, you mentioned that there were pressures on how much tax relief and what that meant for the city budget. And I was surprised by that because of all the other benefits that come from converting these historic buildings and having those be active uses. So what are the things that the city would consider, and the list that you might have, to not have to bring up tax benefits or tax loss and weigh that against larger community benefits?
I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question. The recommendation was specifically to look at what the tax implications are for when these vacant office buildings are converting to a different use, to sort of track that math to see if city dollars funding these conversions makes financial sense in terms of what we get back. Because we have so few projects to look at right now, it's not something, we don't have a program in place to do that. So, maybe with Jonah's project and a couple others, we could start to do that. But at this moment, it's just a recommendation for something that we might want to track to inform future investment of public dollars. Does that make sense?
Well, it would seem like you would also want to track what the public benefits are and have a robust understanding of why you want to do this stuff and what that means for the vitality of neighborhoods or the central city, and the story that we were hearing before about, what Portland is and how we tell these stories.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And DEQ is also, I think, partnering with PSEF to track the carbon impacts of the conversions that they're investing dollars into. So we will have those stories to tell. So that's another thing that we could be tracking.
Hillary, thank you for the work on the study. Could you talk a little bit about next steps for the study and when it would be sort of fully released? And then is there a plan for that study to turn into policy or decision making, or how will it be used?
I don't have a concrete answer on that right now. We would like to get it published and make it more widely available. Other Bureau partners and folks in the Bureau are using some of the recommendations they're considering some of the recommendations in other projects that they're working on, like code alignment and design review changes that you may have heard of in the Central City Code project. So pieces of it are informing other projects, but it's not widely available. What we would like to do, or what I would like to do, is to work with colleagues in other bureaus to identify key priorities that we can then start to advance up the chain of command to try to get some city council support for some of these concepts. So.
Okay. Hey, it's good to see you, Hillary. So I was reading the report, the design review report, and it really focuses on design review, and it's specific that it cannot really do research into the historic properties. And however, it has several proposals, two of which were in the council initiative to temporarily suspend some historic protections, and two of the other proposals were to make permanent former or current temporary situations. So I'm wondering if you could explain to us a little bit of the inner workings, how the historic preservation staff interacts with the design staff, and how it is that there wasn't much research on the historic preservation case studies. And also there was a throwaway comment that they did not look really at permitting planning. And I'm sorry, this is all background. And in the report, it said that generally permitting to get a building permit could be like 4 or 5 times as long as to get a design review approval. So my question is, can you tell me how all of these efforts are integrating into the current city plan to move forward? Or is it just a matter of, to speak politics, like the Yes on Portland, is it just a matter of pressure groups getting to council, telling staff to do work?
That's a softball question, Mark. I'm kidding. Yeah, we used to work together. So the design review reform resolution that directed staff to look at design review and come back in 4 months with some concepts on reforming design review or temporarily suspending design review, that came from city council. And as you know, when city council calls, you jump. So we worked with our colleagues at Portland Permitting and Development to come up with some of the concepts that are in that report. I'm trying to remember the rest of your question, but essentially, I think there are a lot of efforts right now, some disparate and some sort of tangential, to try to reinvigorate downtown. And like one of those is the waterfront study, and all the work that Design Portland's doing, looking at the waterfront, and also PSU architecture studios and MERP studios, and a lot of people are thinking about all these different things, and so is City Council. So, you know, a lot of things are over here and over here, and we're trying to get them together as best we can to try to identify where we have things in common that we can move forward. So
My apologies for having a complex question. I'll simplify it. Who is running the ship? In other words, is the comprehensive plan, including the historic statewide goals and implementation through comprehensive plan and policies, is that still our guiding light?
yes. And if we come forward with a legislative project addressing design review, all of those comp plan goals and policies will be addressed in findings. I can say in that report, City Council, their main focus was design review, but they heard from the public some concerns about some aspects of historic review. And the two processes are so similar that we couldn't talk about one without talking about the other and highlighting the differences. And so we wanted to make sure that we discussed historic stuff to the extent that we needed to, but also focused on design review because that seemed to be the bigger question. So that's why we profiled design review cases versus historic review cases. And in the things that we're thinking about moving forward, that's more focused on design review because historic review does have state level protections that design review doesn't really have, not to the same level anyway. Does that answer your question?
Might be our salvation.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Thank you. I'm curious, I guess I should preface this with, I'm also a displaced New Yorker, so I appreciate your accent, but also interested to hear, since your career here has been so long, were there incentives, rehabilitation incentives that existed in Portland or in Oregon at large that were available that aren't today, that could potentially be with legislation changes or cooperation with the council? Or are there incentives that you would love that you're familiar with in other places that don't exist here?
Well, good question. I would say
And maybe to some degree also the issue about the central city. I mean, to me, what a lot of this comes down to is whether there's kind of flexibility and adaptability baked into the built environment, or whether there's a degree of kind of monoculture and single use, and ultimately that comes with a degree of fragility. I mean, I think one thing that you've seen historically, and Portland is an example of this today, is like single-use districts, which is basically the central city, are very brittle to changes in you know, why are the neighborhoods healthy? Is because they are more flexible and multi-use. You see the same thing with buildings, right? I mean, the reason why people are able to adapt buildings from 200 years ago or 100 years ago is because they were built more open-ended in terms of their use. One of the real challenges that comes with building today and through the permitting process and the zoning that we're talking about is that you bake in a level of specificity to buildings that makes them very difficult to be adapted in the future. So you effectively bake in that brittleness. And it's for good reasons too. I mean, we can think of reasons why we have zoning, and there's reasons why we have building codes. The reasons why we want to designate use areas and design around those. But the effect of those is to basically make a whole lot of, like, you know, I've never worked on a building that was anywhere near as flexible as this Oregon casket building, because you can't do that today. You need to define uses and occupancies and separations and all these sorts of rules and regulations. So to me, I mean, again, getting at your question of multi-use and flexibility, yes, that would be a wonderful thing to encourage in the built environment, but we have so many systems set up that encourage very high degrees of use-based specificity very early on in buildings' lives, and don't account for, you know, ideally the hundreds of years and multi-uses that can occur in them.
So you bring up a really good point, and two things. Zoning is critical that we address zoning to make, because let's be honest, we have a lot of outdated zoning deals going on in the city that don't connect to opportunity. I mean, we have to create opportunity, we have to create density, we have to create jobs, our tax base is totally susceptible to having people work and live and function downtown. And so if we're not doing that, we're not doing our job. The second part is at planning and permitting. I want to see a red carpet with music playing, with people handing out flowers to say people are coming into planning and permitting with money to spend and wanting to do projects. So instead of telling what you can't do, let me tell you how to do it. Let me tell you what works. Let me create. 'Cause there's other cities doing this. This is not unique. But we're Portland, Oregon. A lot of what I experienced in coming from New York, Portland has thrived on being progressive, but being progressive in a way that kind of benefits us all. And you know, we might as well hang a flag of surrender to Amazon downtown, because people aren't shopping, people aren't coming. I mean, come on. I mean, listen. I'm not saying Amazon is all bad or anything, but we need to counter that. And the story is, I believe still a lot of people coming to Portland or to New York or to Chicago that still want to live downtown, that want to be able to walk out their door to a restaurant, to music, to entertainment, museums, whatever it is. That's unique. You can't necessarily have that in the suburbs in the same way. So if we don't build to that opportunity, we're missing that's the only thing that I think, in my opinion, that tells the story of why we should create more housing, more flexible office, more live work, whatever it is. It's a new day. The game has changed. The story has changed. When are we going to respond to it? Or are we going to wait until, we get rolled over? And I feel like we're kind of getting rolled over right now. So it's time for us to plant our flag and to say, okay, we're going to try this and this and this and this. And I want to tell you that when I started the first East Bank Commerce Center, I tell you how smart or how stupid I am. I bought the East Bank, Water Avenue, and where Hair of the Dog, I don't know if any of you guys know, Hair of the Dog, the brewery. They were all for sale at once. And I bought it, and I was consulting with somebody, and I said, the zone, you can't do, I want to do what I did, create small work, creative spaces. Oh, the zoning isn't correct. I said, how do you change the zoning? Oh, you know, I guess you can go through a process. You can talk to the mayor. Vera Capps was the mayor. I called Vera Capps. I'm from Brooklyn. She's from Brooklyn. We said, I called her. She gave me an appointment. Said, you get 20 minutes. Came in. 2 hours later, we walked out. She goes, I'm going to help you. I believe what you're doing is the right thing. It's working. And so she gave me a spot zoning change for East Bank and Water Avenue, and we tried it. And you know, it hasn't been perfect, but it worked. We need to do that.
I guess you've thanked the speakers. Thank you very much for doing that. I want to say that next Thursday will be the next part of this design review session at noon on Zoom. Brandon Spencer Hartle, the author of the report on design review, and Peggy Moretti will have a conversation, an explanation of what's proposed and what will happen next in terms of its review process. And so please go, I think, next week to the website and sign up so that you can get the access to the Zoom connection to hear that. And then probably late in June, we'll start another series of sessions once we know where the council is thinking about going, what we ought to be doing next, because at least the current plan, as we understand it, is that sometime in the fall it'll go to the Planning Commission. The design review report will go with recommendations, and then to the council probably before the holiday season. So that's kind of what we're aiming at, is to get people to respond and participate in the process through that in that time period. Again, thank you very much for coming, and we'll hope to see you at future sessions. Bye.